Welcome to Kindred, hosted by me, Kate, and my sister, Jen. In this podcast, we explore our human relationship to the natural world. In connecting to this planet, we also connect to understanding, compassion, and empathy. How can we see ourselves as not separate or above animals in nature, but a critical and integrated part of an active ecosystem? Through conversations with animal advocates, scientists, conservationists, and many others, we look to inspire a new awareness of how and why we connect to animals in nature in order to repair and restore our relationship to the natural world. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Kindred. Everyone is in like all 8 billion people on the planet. That's pretty much, those are our listeners. That's our listenership, everyone. So I always say, hello, everyone. I know. Pretty fancy, aren't we? Mm-hmm. You just winked at me. Animals are listening. You just winked at me, but no one can hear your wink. You have to say like wink. It's a podcast.
I said maybe some animals are listening to us too.
So, right. What do you know? Probably like dolphins.
We have more than 8 billion.
I bet you ravens are listening. Remember how smart they are?
Right. Humpback whales probably are listening.
Probably. So the other weekend, Dave, my husband, and I went to our cabin in the Shenandoah Valley, West Virginia. And Jennifer, you remember that little creek, that little stream we meaning me, mostly used to play in?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, and in our family photo album of our times there, do you remember that pic of us all in the river and me in my bathing suit, all of us playing in the river there?
I also remember that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then do you remember when the neighbor, Butch Basie, told our mother to stop letting me swim in their cow pond because there were cottonmouth snakes in there?
Cottonmouth, yeah. I only learned about that recently. I'm glad I didn't know because I probably would have passed out just thinking about swimming with swimming snakes, because swimming snakes are one of my most terrifying creatures on the planet.
Not really swimming. They're like land and water, but yes, I don't need to be hanging out with cottonmouths. But I was a feral child in some ways, so that's how that goes. But listen, I've always loved streams, although I will say I have lost my affinity for swimming in ponds because gross, right? So thank you.
Yeah. Really
thanks for the farmer to set me straight on that. But now I live up from the Brandywine River outside of Philadelphia, and there's lots of water in Pennsylvania, and specifically in the Philly area. And we live near lots of quite large rivers, like let's name them. So there's the Delaware, right? We've got
the mighty Delaware. Mm-hmm.
Yep, mighty Delaware. Then we've got the Schuylkill. Try and spell that. Ever.
Right. I can spell it. I'll spare you. The Schuylkill River. Yep, that's another good one.
Spell it. Let's hear it.
SCHUYLKILL.
Oh man, you are so good. You are really smart. Uh-huh. I'm so impressed by that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you win a prize. So there are like tons of creeks, right? So there's the Wissahickon Creek, there's Cobb's Creek, and you live near the what?
Pennypack.
Pennypack
Creek.
Yeah. So, and that's not even like the half of it. We could go on and on, truly. So it turns out we live in a watershed. Who knew? And what's a watershed, you say? Well, that's what I wanted to know too. So today we are lucky enough to be speaking with Stroud Water Research Center, a world leader in the science, research, and education of all things freshwater and watersheds. And their mission statement is, quote, "We seek to advance knowledge and stewardship of freshwater systems through global research, education, and watershed restoration," end quote. And boy, do they ever. So today, representing SWRC is Senior Research Scientist Melinda Daniels, PhD, and Director of Watershed Restoration, Matthew Ehrhart. Matt's work is focused primarily on water quality, watershed restoration, agriculture, conservation and preservation, and associated policy and implementation issues. And Melinda's focuses include river restoration, watershed management, and stream ecosystem science. Though much of it is theoretically based, all of her research is placed within the context of better understanding our impacts on rivers, improving river management, and enabling successful river restoration. And I pulled those short bios from their website, stroudcenter.org. So thanks so much to Melinda and Matt for walking us through how changing climates are impacting our watersheds and, of course, ultimately us, and just the absolute critical role they play in our landscapes and how the ecosystem in a river is basically another version of terrestrial life, just underwater, she talked about. She'll explain. I love that.
Yeah.
That was super cool. But before we get to our conversation, I just want to thank those of you who are supporting us through Apple subscriptions, clapping, a round of applause here, exclusively through Apple Podcasts, and Buy Me a Coffee, which you can find through our website, kindredpodcast.co. Your support means the world to us and helps us do more here at Kindred. And if you subscribe, you'll get early access to episodes and exclusive Kindred Plus content that we love so much, don't we, Jenny?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very exclusive.
Long pause. Mm-hmm. You sure love it. Mm-hmm. All right, so let's jump into the apparent bathtub we live in, sans the bubbles, and get to our conversation with Stroud Water Research Center. And we'll see you at the takeaway. Melinda and Matt, welcome to Kindred, and thank you so much for joining us today. If you would, please introduce yourselves and tell us what you do. And Melinda, we'll start with you.
Okay, thanks for having us. I'm Melinda Daniels. I'm a senior research scientist at the Stroud Water Research Center, which is a nonprofit, non-advocacy research institute in southeastern PA. And my specialization really focuses on the non-living elements of rivers and streams. So the movement of water and sediment and how those forces combine to create different river landscapes over time.
All right. And Matt.
Hi, and thanks again for having us on. My name is Matt Ehrhart. I manage the watershed restoration team at Stroud Water Research Center. So my team is out on the landscape working on mostly agriculturally related projects, but sort of implementing those landscape changes to improve our river and stream systems. And we do that largely sort of dovetailed in with our science team, and so that we're using the landscape to ask and answer questions and finding out what works and hoping to implement the best science in the projects that we do.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for joining us, both of you, today. We so appreciate your time and your work. So Melinda, we'll start with you. I wanted to lay a clear foundation for this conversation, just starting with an explanation of what a watershed is, where they are, and how they function in the environment. And then we can talk a little bit about the origin story of Stroud Water Research Center and why it came to be. And for everyone's listening, this conversation will be focused primarily in Pennsylvania, but you guys can talk about other places. But yeah, so Melinda, get us started.
Okay, so a watershed is an area of the land surface that collects rainwater, snowmelt, all liquid forms of precipitation, and funnels that, drains it towards one central sort of outflow point. So that can be a really small space in a small watershed, and it can be an enormous part of the Earth's surface, and they nest within each other. I think the best analogy I tell people is to think about your bathtub. So whatever water falls inside that bathtub goes down the one drain of your bathtub. If it falls outside, it's going somewhere else. As far as where they're located, like I said, they're everywhere. Every part of the Earth is part of a watershed, every part of the surface of the Earth. And sometimes those drain to bigger rivers and then into bigger rivers yet again. Sometimes they drain directly into a lake or an ocean, or even just a dry central valley like Death Valley out in California.
So they're basically are they just natural filtration systems then? Is that what you're saying? Just sort of?
Well, they're natural collectors,
Okay.
Think of it as a collector. Now, getting to the function aspect, along with all the water that they collect and funnel towards an outflow point, goes a lot of things. So that can be good things, natural things like leaves that fall off of the tree, nutrients that leach out of soils and minerals that dissolve out of rock, but also artificial things like urban surface runoff, oil spills from leaking cars. Everything that is on the ground in a watershed can be taken with the water down through the watershed to its outflow point. So it is a great collector. It collects absolutely everything.
So then, Melinda, tell us a little bit about the history of Stroud Water Research Center and why it came to be.
Well, the Stroud Center really began by a woman called Ruth Patrick, who was a professor at the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia. And she was really the pioneer of the entire field of stream ecology.
Right.
And obviously also being a pioneer female scientist for her time. But she really helped develop the field of stream ecology, and specifically with respect to watersheds and the quality of water they were delivering. So her work focused on linking the life in a stream, in particular very small diatoms that you can't really see with the naked eye, to water quality. And she found that you were able to relate the community of these diatoms to whether the water was clean and usable or heavily polluted and not usable. And so this was really her field station. The Stroud Center today began as her field station and really grew progressively over time into what we are today, which is a standalone stream ecosystem ecology, river science, river watershed restoration, and education enterprise.
Yeah, and we'll link her story on our website because she does have a fantastic story, and how she came to be working with Dick and Joan Stroud, and just her whole story is amazing, especially for the time that she was.
Yes.
So yeah, it's a great story. Okay, so Melinda, let's focus in on water and break down what like a healthy stream system is and watershed looks like. Like what species are living in streams and rivers, etc., and what are their jobs in that ecosystem. And I'll just say, it's really incredible if you stand near or in a river, even just for a few minutes, it just comes alive with so many busy creatures that I don't think people realize, is home to so many species. There's so much more than just fish in there. So take us into, we need our scuba gear, get us into the river.
Yeah, well, it's difficult for people to relate to that complex ecosystem in a stream because it's hard, people aren't walking around with their scuba gear looking under the water. But if you think about a terrestrial ecosystem, if you look out, at a forest, for example, you see the small plants on the ground, the big trees, you see the birds flitting around, you can hear the buzz of insects, and you see the large megafauna like the deer walking through and the foxes and coyotes that are the predators. You see that whole pyramid of life, so to speak, the whole food chain that's obvious to the naked eye. And all of that exists in a stream too, in a river. It's just that it's not as readily seen, right? Everything is downscaled for the most part, particularly, the size of streams and rivers that most people are interacting with are not enormous rivers. And so you have the microbial community on the bed of the river. You have aquatic plants, including algae, that are basically the equivalent to our land plants that are photosynthesizing and creating energy. And there's a whole very complex insect community that is decomposing organic matter and bringing that into the food chain. And then you go up and up the food chain. Essentially, you have things like crayfish, that are crawling all around. And then you start to get into the different fish species, and there are, just like in the terrestrial, there's, the equivalent of your bunny rabbits that are going around nibbling on the plants and the algae. And then there's the bigger predators that eat those, and the even bigger predators that eat everybody. And, humans typically are interacting most with the very top of that food chain, right? We're in there going after the apex predator trout, for example, in a freshwater river. And that's what we're familiar with. But what we don't realize is that trout is dependent on everything underneath it, right?
Yes.
That huge, complex biodiverse ecosystem. And in terms of what that ecosystem looks like in terms of a quote unquote healthy stream or river, right? We as ecologists and biologists would expect to see complexity at each of those trophic levels or levels of the food chain, right? The study after study has shown that when you have diverse communities of different species who have similar functions, that provides a resiliency, right? So if you have one drop out for any reason, there's another group to replace the function in that whole system, right? So you would like to see high biodiversity to know that it's a high quality, quote unquote, healthy stream.
Yeah, and it's so the complexity is crazy. You kind of actually, I felt like you're describing, like you were saying, how we live here, but this is just all underwater. And
yes.
That's a really interesting way to think of that. Never thought about that. And you're like, oh, right. And so there's bigger guys and there's all these eco-engineers that are happening and the complexity. And you're like, oh, right. There's birds and deer and beavers and oh, don't forget all the plants in there. And because you just sort of think of like, oh, the beautiful stream running past yourself, which is lovely. But I love that idea of it. It's the same. It's just that kind of flipped that on my head for me. That's
it's just all underwater.
Yeah,
and,
right.
The same concepts apply. Like it's important for terrestrial animals to be able to move around and migrate and mix populations to stay healthy. The very same thing applies to aquatic species. Fish need to migrate. It's hardwired into many species, different reproductive life histories. Yeah. And if they can't move, the population crashes. So it's very, very, very similar to terrestrial ecosystems, just underwater.
Right.
And I think we're challenged in a similar way. We tend to focus on the big attractive things in either ecosystem. Everybody likes white-tailed deer or bunny rabbits.
Right. Yeah.
And in the stream it's trout, and we sort of forget that. And Melinda, you mentioned this earlier, that the microbial community in particular in the stream is what's doing so much work in terms of ecosystem services for us. And we, you don't see them and people tend not to think about them, but that unseen community is the part of the system that's processing nitrogen and helping to process pollutants that get in there. And, just important to realize that whole interconnected system is really important. And without that piece, not only do we not get our sort of the ecosystem services we value and use as humans, but we don't have the trout either.
Right. Absolutely. And it reminds me of we've talked about this in the podcast, speaking with people like in the ocean and conservation there, but it is like these little guys are so critical. They're one of those pillars, and if you take one of them out, it collapses. And it makes me think of how a lot of what's happening in our waterways is a barometer to how we're doing overall. And which ones do you? I guess you look at them all the same. But when we talked last, we talked a little bit about the mayfly and how they're a barometer, and just sort of like if you don't see one species, it could sort of be signaling a bigger problem.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there are canaries in the coal mine, so to speak, right? Species that are more sensitive to pollution or more sensitive to temperature change or drought or whatever the disturbance might be, that are the first to drop out and disappear. And that is a red flag that, something not so hot is going on in the system.
Exactly. And you know what? This is a perfect time. Matt, we'll turn to you here. And now that Melinda's given us a solid understanding, of this ecosystem, well, in the basic ways. I'm sure, it's far simplified, but
Yes.
the ecosystems like working in our waterways. I'd like to dig into changing climates, rising water temperatures, flooding, pollution, agriculture, and development. Just a few minor topics, no big deal. Only take a couple minutes. But let's maybe break it down into two categories, right? I mean, I think like I was kind of thinking of it in terms of climate change and development, and I feel like I could kind of put those however many things I mentioned into those two departments. But what I'd like to know is, what are the effects of changing climates and development on the landscape, and the landscape and the impact they have on rivers and streams, and then how are they meaning those impacts affecting us humans in our daily lives?
Right. So I think, a lot fits into your two categories there. We've been thinking about and wrestling with the challenges associated with development for a long time. And I'll include not just buildings and cities and urban spaces in development, but the land uses we use to support all that, to grow food and for our housing. And basically, every time we alter 1 square foot, of the Earth's landscape, we change the way it functions and performs for us. So, completely impervious surfaces like roofs and roads and parking lots are one, sort of the end of that spectrum where, when we do that, we diminish the infiltration and groundwater recharge we see from a water perspective. And instead of sinking in as that water runs off, that's the challenges we typically think of with urban spaces, right? That it can contribute to flooding simply by the fact of its volume. Water running across the landscape has a lot of energy, and so it picks up everything along its path, and that could be pollutants like sediment. It can be heavy metals from our road surfaces, all whatever's laying around on the landscape.
Right.
As Melinda mentioned, it's all, if you think about it as a bathtub headed towards a drain, those watersheds collect everything from the land surface. Right. And some things, it's really hard to and expensive to address completely impervious surfaces. We do it in some ways with things like green roofs, and we can change to pervious paving, but our urban centers are real challenges from a water standpoint because of that. Mm-hmm. On the agricultural side, we've gotten quite a bit better actually at learning how to implement agricultural practices that they don't take us all the way back sort of to a native forest, but we do significantly better now than we used to in terms of having our soils that are growing our food also performing better ecologically.
Right.
And
thinking about farming too. I hadn't really thought about it. You think, like cows and horses, they're just sort of natural animals like on the landscape, but the contribution, I think the construct or like how they move through the landscape in context to, I guess, water locally to them can be an issue, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, certainly farms, well, for a long time, and particularly now, we see an increasing density of livestock. So you have a lot of animals, and where those animals are particularly close to water or the runoff isn't well managed,
right.
Right. It really creates challenges. I mean, if you think about the ag portions of the landscape, places like Lancaster County, parts of Chester County, where we grow a lot of food. Kids like me grow up there just assuming the water's brown naturally, right? If you want to see clear water, you have to go somewhere else.
Right. Yeah.
And I think, it's the work being done and that has been done at the Stroud Center for decades that sort of lets us believe that we can have places to live and we can grow our food and we can still have trout in our streams if we manage things well.
Absolutely. And, if we could just talk about flooding a little bit. When I was researching for this episode, it's sort of, and back to that tub analogy, like when the streams flood, does it wash out the ecosystem? Like, does it create, like, if you have like the Brandywine, let's say, and then we have these huge floods coming through, does it create an imbalance within the river?
The flood in itself doesn't typically. I mean,
Okay.
things get rearranged, and some of the macroinvertebrates get washed downstream, and but the systems are sort of accustomed and structured to accommodate those events to a large scale.
Okay, that's true. Good point. There's been floods for a really, really long time. It just seems like, oh, there's more of them. So, okay, I got it.
Well, and that gets,
Again,
go ahead, Melinda.
sorry. I would just go back to the terrestrial for an analogy. Like many forests are fire adapted. Like a fire is a type of disturbance. And without fire, they actually become less diverse, less productive, less healthy. And so there's like a happy medium of fire frequency. Like a forest needs to burn every, I don't know, I mean, it varies by forest, but, let's just say hypothetically every, 80 to 90 years. But if it starts burning every 5 years, that's a problem, right? And it's the same with streams, right? Matt's absolutely right. They're structurally adapted to accommodate floods. And actually floods are a kind of rejuvenating type of disturbance in many ways. But if it happens too much and it becomes like a chronic thing, which is what happens in very urbanized watersheds, then you reach a tipping point where the ecosystem can no longer sort of adjust, and it becomes an altered, really degraded ecosystem state.
And that really ties back to your initial question about climate. When we have historically thought about flooding, it's been largely associated with big tropical events, hurricanes, tropical storms, and with climate change, we see this pattern of sort of increasing rainfall intensity in more confined areas. So the flooding is different now in that we have really intense short-term flood events in smaller areas and more frequently, which is probably one of the most significant impacts of climate change in this region. And frankly, that's harder for us to deal with as humans, because the changes that we would need to make to really try to do a better job of accommodating that are extremely expensive and would consume a lot of land. So, I mean, when I think of the challenges, the sort of routine challenges of climate change, that's one of them, and the other one is just the temperature. From our stream standpoint, an awful lot of, when you think about biological organisms, the colder the temperature, the slower our biology works. It's hard to grow, it's hard to reproduce when it's colder. So historically, our organisms, they function in the stream up to 65, 68 degrees, and then and that was where their maximum sort of growth and performance was. And they never saw temperatures higher than that. We had trees, things were cooler, more groundwater. Excuse me. But their tipping point, it gets a few degrees warmer than that, and they die. They don't just not perform as well. So the thermal impact of climate change on our streams, particularly where we've lost our tree cover, and we've lost our groundwater sources or diminished our groundwater sources, is really significant.
And it makes me, I love the what you're saying too, and just talking about the temperature and everything. And I love the sort of referencing fire, because it seems very similar. And we talked about fire use and, what's healthy and what isn't in episode 27. You listeners can go back and listen to that if you haven't, but it's very much the same. Like you were saying, there's a healthy experience that the natural world has been doing since it's been the natural world, and it's that out of balance. And I talked to you, Melinda, not that long ago, and you really sort of hit it home for me, where it was too about taking changing climates and then adding in all these other sort of impacts like development and how critical, and like you, Matt, were saying specifically for this local area where there's a lot of development happening at the same time. Pennsylvania, for those who don't live around here, there's a lot of water here, right? I feel like there's marshy areas, and where I am, I'm off the Brandywine, and feels like there's a lot of water, like, because we're a watershed, this area, right? So it's sort of like, but when you add these other things like rising temperatures and lots of development, and when development isn't sort of taking care of, okay, how do we divert this water in a healthy way? I don't even know if that's possible, but this is where it's impacting. Then we're back to those little guys in the river, right?
Yeah, and the people that live along the river, right?
Right.
And just to go back to the bathtub analogy for a second, the drain locations typically are where the highest concentration of human population is. So Philadelphia, Baltimore, Wilmington, Newark, these are all the drains in the bathtubs, the bigger bathtubs, right? So there's an ecological effect on the stream itself, but there's definitely a human impact that's quite severe. And like Matt said, it's extraordinarily expensive to adjust our built infrastructure to accommodate these increasing floods.
Yes. And I think that's what 2 years ago when we had that one hurricane, Philly was underwater. Like it hadn't been, I don't know, maybe ever, because of all of the things. So that sort of gives you chills thinking of like, I'm in a drain and there's a lot of stuff around the drain, right? That's that sort of, enough garbage gets in there and whew,
Well, I think you hear that from people repeatedly in conversation now. Like, right, we've never seen this area underwater before, and it's been underwater 4 times in the last 6 years. So it's really a pretty significant statement about the change we're seeing in our systems and our inability to do an awful lot about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So now I feel like if we get back to Stroud, Matt, if you would talk us through Stroud's education and outreach, right? Because we're kind of like, this is the next step in this conversation. And so outreach programs and creating solutions to these challenges we're talking about. And I want to talk too about any action we can take, meaning me personally and our listeners, in becoming stewards in our communities. And so it's like solutions, right? Like, so how does Stroud go from science to education to inspiration and change? And what does that look like?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I think education and outreach has been one of the core pillars for Stroud from the beginning. I mean, it was something Ruth Patrick thought was important, that we can't just do, science somewhere and then write a paper that goes on a shelf or on a hard drive now, that we've got to be telling people what we're learning and trying to improve the system. And we're very intentional about doing that sort of across the population. We have an education program that deals with, I think, between 6,000 and 8,000 kids a year from sort of the elementary through high school grade levels. And our science team is sort of constantly out there at academic conferences and talking to peers about what they're learning, what we're learning, what that means, what are the next questions to ask.
Right.
And we also have, across a number of programs, pretty robust general public education programming. We have events at the Stroud Center. We hold film festivals and create all sorts of opportunities for people to learn more in ways that are pretty digestible, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I would say within the last 10 years, we really focused very intentionally on other conservation practitioners. So engineers, biologists, folks who work at the county conservation district or the state regulatory agencies, and sort of bringing them into workshops and conferences where we're talking about the science and things we're learning at Stroud, as well as our academic collaborators in other places,
Right.
and really trying to make sure that the folks who are professionally at this task of trying to improve our environment are getting all the benefits that they can from the work we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we probably reach about 10,000 of those conservation professionals a year, which gives you some idea of the scale of the effort.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah, I think I visited your center, and it's incredible, and just the amount of programs and the rooms you're talking about. You have camps for kids, and then talk to me a little bit about your citizen science, because that's something that's featured on your website, and your website is incredible. We'll put the link up too. It's a great website, but tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so our citizen science grew out of primarily efforts in the Delaware watershed, and a lot of work funded by the William Penn Foundation. So it started with an effort with lots of different nonprofit groups to sort of give them a fuller understanding of the science of watersheds and streams and ecology. So Melinda and our other team of scientists put on I don't remember, probably half a dozen or 8 different 2-day workshops all across the watershed to really help bolster the basic understanding of these systems. And then we've been working with them, working with these groups in their local watersheds to answer the questions they have, or do they see something that's a concern? There's a lot of focus on the use of road salt. We use it to salt our roads in the winter to keep traffic moving at 55 miles an hour, 24/7. But so we're putting a lot of salt in the environment, and I think people are becoming more aware of that challenge. So one of the major initiatives in our citizen science programs is working with folks and continuous data loggers in their streams to look at salt concentrations. But the citizen science is really interesting because you're working with people who have some initiative to be there.
That's right. That's right.
And you're trying to work with them to give them the tools and guidance and expertise to collect the data and then actually analyze the data, which tends to be something that most folks aren't familiar with. So it's a real learning process, and I think we're getting better at our piece of it.
Yeah.
But it's really satisfying because you see local people having articles in their newspaper, or letters to the editor, or
Right.
meeting with their municipal representatives to talk about problems that they now are becoming experts on.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where it's really making this available to the general public, right? And getting more active, just the awareness on that, like a simple level, like you're saying, like salt, right? It's got to go somewhere and all these kind of things. I think that's where, but Stroud does an incredible job with the programs and education, because that's really where it's at. And that's what's going to sort of taking all of you super smart people and doing this stuff and sort of translating it for someone like me. So like, what can I do in my everyday life to sort of to support the watershed? So that leads me to my last question for both of you. And that is, why is this such a critical conversation, and why should we care, right? Like, I want to make this personal to people and open up a new awareness that we bring to our lives on a daily basis, not just when our homes are flooded or, we find out that our water is contaminated.
Yeah. One of our problems as humans is that we're focused on the right now. It's hard for us to be long term, and so we tend to not think about these problems until the flood happens, or and I think it's sometimes hard for people to figure out what can I do, as just one person. And I think that's something our education program in particular does a really good job with, trying to break this down into actionable, kind of items that you can take to, you don't have to save the world. You just have to work on your little piece of it. Right. So, the things you can do to conserve water and conserve energy cumulatively make a huge difference. And I think if there's anything that's my favorite, it's go plant a tree. I think we associate so much with trees from a watershed standpoint, the shade and temperature and infiltration and food in our stream systems from their leaves. And if you don't like our lens on it and you're not a water person, you can go listen to Doug Tallamy from University of Maryland talk about trees and how important they are to insects and the ecosystem. And his favorite line is go plant a tree, so it's, and it's something every one of us can do on the piece of the planet that we live on.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's your perspective, Melinda?
I mean, I just really think that we as a society need to do a better job of thinking about the impact our actions have on our neighbors, right? And with watersheds and streams and rivers, it's literally what you do impacts people downriver, whether it's down a little tiny stream, down onto your neighbor's property, downhill, wherever it is, your decision to act the way you do on your property impacts others, whether you like it or not. And those of us that, happen to live way downstream, you're subjected to the actions of many people living upstream, right, in the upper watershed. And, I just wish that was reflected not only in our individual decision making, but also in the way we structure our municipal planning decisions. That different communities work together more and we're more coordinated in planning at the watershed scale as opposed to artificial political boundaries. We'd be a lot better off and have fewer of these problems.
Yeah, this conversation reminds me a lot, Matt, you're talking about planting trees, and it's just like trees are, it's like the water conversation is a lot like the oxygen conversation to me, where we take it so for granted, right? And we turn on our tap and water comes out, and it rains enough that it keeps us all alive, and that there's enough trees that we're quote unquote caring for that we can still breathe. And I think that's where, and I love what you're saying, Melinda, about, down the river, because it's like you can dump everything in your river and you never see it again. But it really is that idea of, and this goes across the board for us at this podcast, like for Kindred, it's like, it's all about down the river and thinking of yourself as being down the river from what you're doing above you. And that just, it goes across the board. So thank you so much for your time, Matt and Melinda. I really appreciate this. This has been a great new perspective for me, certainly. And Stroud is an incredible place. If you're local, you can get a tour and send your children there, please, for the summer, and teach them all about the importance of our rivers. And it's the next generation, isn't it? So, but you guys are doing phenomenal work, and we so appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for hosting us.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have to talk to you again, and after the next flood, we'll see what's happening. Yeah, thanks again, guys.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Hey, everyone. Welcome back to The Takeaway. I forgot to mention in the intro that you were not able to be at this recording, unfortunately, but you have listened to the interview. So that's why Jenny was not there.
Quieter than normal, yes.
Yeah, you sure were quiet. You just muted yourself all over the place. But yeah, I forgot to mention that in the intro. But so one little thing that I thought, well, one big thing, but just a quick comment that I really loved about when we talked about how, flooding is an act of nature that the landscape is completely, like, totally equipped for, much like how fire and the landscape is, there's been fires forever and there's been flooding forever. But that's the big caveat, is that, they were saying when you combine changing climates, development, lack of watershed restoration, that's when flooding becomes an issue. And I just thought that was a really interesting sort of comparison, how nature's just so equipped to deal with all these things until A, B, and C. And then, talking to you about before, what your takeaway was also something, just a sort of elaboration on that.
Before I talk about that, though, I think just the frequency that all those things are happening now is the problem. It's like if floods used to be every 100 years or whatever, and people would talk about it. Now it's just same with fires; it's more frequent. But with flooding, it's interesting because, like you said, we have so many rivers around here, and I know people who live right on the river, yourself incled, and you've had this experience too, which is that. All of a sudden it's coming up to your house, and that kind of thing has been going on in my awareness for probably the last 25 to 30 years. And I remember having a conversation about it with a friend of mine, and it being made clear to me for the first time is when you when development is as rampant as it is in our area, and you take away ground that absorbs water, then the water has nowhere to go through these parking lots, and the concrete and asphalt do not make for the land to be able to absorb the water the way it used to be. And so that's part of why it's so much worse around us, I think. Now, we definitely have a lot of rivers, like you said, but it just used to be that
it absolutely
could accommodate it.
Right, absolutely. And it's not even just what's getting laid down on the ground, it's the roofs, right? It's the amount of roofs and houses and developments that are being put up with really irresponsible sort of irrigation to deal with where this water can go,
how the water runs off. Right.
And I think Melinda will be thrilled to hear us talking about this, because she talked a lot about that, and that's a huge part of this issue, is that when you have major development happening in a watershed, you are going to have these huge floods that are happening now. And I thought, I never put the two, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I never put that together. So obviously, and yet, if you ask Melinda, she'll say she's been, shouting this from the rooftops, basically. And I think she was the one who brought that in the forefront for me, for sure. So that's a really good point. Thank you for bringing that up. And the other couple of quick little things, I just love Stroud, and their outreach programs and their education programs are incredible, and their citizen science, and how solution focused they are, and how we can learn and change and heal. And I also loved, and you and I talked about this a little bit before we started recording, about how they were everything washes downstream, right? And it turns out we're all downstream of somebody or something, right?
That's right.
It's a bigger, it's kind of like a life lesson, isn't it? Just to think of your neighbor, think of animals, think of nature, and how our actions affect others out there, right? And I think it's just all connected, just like the creeks and streams and rivers, all ending up coming through a watershed and into the ocean. You could use this.
Yes. We would prefer that it wasn't all connected sometimes, I think, because then we could just do whatever we want, and then it wouldn't matter. But that's not how it works. That's what we're finding, right? Yeah,
that's right.
That's not how it works.
That's right. So thanks so much to Stroud and Melinda and Matt, and to all of you for joining us today. If you want to learn more about Stroud Water Research Center and the groundbreaking work of Melinda Daniels and Matt Ehrhart are leading, visit their website at stroudcenter.org. And for show notes and guest links, you can go to our website at thekindredpodcast.co, where you can also sign up for our newsletter. And you can also, through our website or your Apple iPhone, you can subscribe to Kindred Podcasts. And on our website, you can donate through Buy Me a Coffee. And please follow us on Instagram and Facebook at The Kindred Pod. And please share this episode. Everybody loves water. Everyone loves clean water. and no one needs or loves water in their house except for the tap water or tub. Your other kind
That's right.
And
everyone also loves smart scientists. Don't forget that.
Amazing. Absolutely. And whoever can spell Schuylkill the fastest, other than my sister, gets a prize, because you already
I
did
can't
that.
wait to find out what my prize is going to be.
Spell it again. See how fast you can spell Schuylkill.
SCHUYLKILL.
It's a lot of L's, but I'm going to give it to you because you did
I did it right.
I thought you said
I did it all. SCHUYLKIL.
Oh, I thought you said 3 L's. That's perfect. You're amazing. You are amazing, sister. I love you so much. Thanks you so much for listening, and lots of love from our very own watershed right here in Philadelphia. Take care.
Bye.
Kindred is hosted by me and my sister Jen, produced by Kat Gaddy and myself, sound production and editing by Dan Cooper, original music by Ellie Grace, and our Kindred artwork was created by Lindsay Coffin. Please follow, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and feel free to contact us through our website at kindredpodcast.co, where you can also find links to our socials, Patreon page, and show notes.